It was a quiet evening in Brookshire, a small town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests. The streets were nearly empty as the last rays of sunlight dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobblestone pathways. Emma Hartley sat in her cozy living room sipping a cup of tea as she flipped through a novel. The steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner was the only sound that filled the room. The day had been uneventful, like most days in Brookshire. Emma, a quiet woman in her early 30s, lived alone in the house she inherited from her grandmother. It had been nearly a year since she left the bustle of the city, seeking solace in the quiet charm of the countryside. Her job as a freelance writer allowed her the flexibility to live wherever she pleased, and Brookshire seemed like the perfect retreat for someone who wanted to escape the noise of the world. Just as she was about to settle into her novel for the evening, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the house. Emma froze. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at this hour. Slowly, she set her cup down and made her way to the front door. When she opened it, there was no one there, just the stillness of the evening and the faint rustling of leaves. But something was on her doorstep, a package. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address or markings, except for her name scrawled on the top in large, bold letters, Emma Hartley. Emma frowned and picked it up. The package was surprisingly heavy for its size. She turned it over in her hands, inspecting it for any clue as to where it had come from, but there was nothing. Curiosity mixed with a strange sense of unease as she brought the package inside and set it on the kitchen table. For several moments, she just stared at it. Who could have sent this? Why hadn't they stayed to deliver it in person? And more importantly, what was inside? Her heartbeat quickened as she carefully tore open the brown paper. Inside was an old wooden box, its surface worn and slightly chipped, as though it had seen many years of use. A small brass lock held it shut, but there was no key. Emma's hands shook slightly as she ran her fingers over the lock, trying to figure out how to open it. Suddenly her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the eerie silence. Emma jumped, her heart racing before reaching for the phone. It was a message from an unknown number. Do not open the box. She stared at the message, feeling a chill run down her spine. How could anyone know what she was doing at that exact moment? She glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the windows as if expecting to see someone watching her from the shadows. But there was nothing. Her fingers hovered over the box. Every instinct told her to follow the message's warning, but the mystery was too compelling. Why shouldn't she open it? What could possibly be inside that someone didn't want her to see? Ignoring the message, Emma grabbed a small screwdriver from the drawer and pried at the lock. After a few minutes of effort, the lock popped open with a soft click. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest, and then slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. She unfolded it, revealing a faded, handwritten note. Emma, you must find the key before it's too late. The clock is ticking. The words made no sense. What key? And who had written this? She turned the note over, but there was nothing else. No more clues, just that cryptic message. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, the message was even stranger. You shouldn't have done that. Emma's pulse quickened. She felt a sudden urge to lock all the doors and windows. But something else drew her attention. The grandfather clock. It had stopped ticking. She hadn't even noticed until now, but the steady rhythm that had been a comforting background noise all day was gone. She stood up and walked over to the clock, her hand reaching out to the pendulum. It was still. The clock read exactly 8:15 p.m. She stepped back, unnerved. The coincidence was too strange. She glanced at her phone again, hoping there wouldn't be another message, but just as she looked down, her phone buzzed once more. The clock. Look inside. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Whoever was sending these messages was watching her. She looked around the room again, but there was no sign of anyone. Trembling, she returned to the clock. Her hands were shaking as she opened the front panel and peered inside. At first, she saw nothing but the swinging pendulum and the gears that turned the hands. But then, at the bottom, wedged between two pieces of wood, was a small metal key. Her heart pounded as she reached inside and pulled the key out. It was old, tarnished, and oddly shaped, unlike any key she had seen before. What was this for, and who had placed it there? Before she could think further, her phone buzzed again. You're getting closer, but the real test begins now. Emma was growing increasingly uneasy. She wasn't sure if this was some elaborate prank or if something far more sinister was at play. Clutching the key in her hand, she sat back down at the kitchen table staring at the box and the note. What was she supposed to do next? There was no clear answer. She decided to search the house looking for anything that the key might unlock. For nearly an hour she scoured every room trying the key in every lock she could find, but nothing fit. Exhausted and frustrated, she returned to the living room where the old family portrait hung over the fireplace. The portrait showed Emma's grandmother, her stern face softened slightly by a faint smile. Emma had always loved her grandmother, though she knew little about her past. She had inherited the house after her grandmother's death, but her grandmother had been a private woman, revealing little about her life or the house's history. As Emma stared at the portrait, something caught her eye. There, in the lower corner of the frame, was a small, barely noticeable indentation. She moved closer, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. It was a hidden compartment. Her hands trembling, Emma inserted the key into the indentation and turned. With a soft click, the compartment opened, revealing a small, leather-bound journal. She carefully pulled it out, her fingers brushing against the worn cover. Inside were handwritten entries in her grandmother's familiar, neat script. As Emma flipped through the pages, she discovered a story that chilled her to the bone. The journal spoke of a secret society that had existed in Brookshire for centuries, one that her grandmother had been a part of. The society was tasked with guarding a powerful artifact, a key to an ancient otherworldly door that must never be opened. The entries became more frantic as the pages went on, describing how the society had crumbled over time, and how her grandmother had hidden the key to protect it from falling into the wrong hands. Emma's blood ran cold as she realized the significance of the key she had found. It wasn't just a key, it was the key. The messages, the package, the clock, it was all connected. Someone wanted the key, and they were willing to go to any lengths to get it. Her phone buzzed again, and this time the message was chilling. "You have the key, now bring it to us." Emma felt a surge of fear and anger. She didn't know who they were, but she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't let them have the key. Her grandmother had sacrificed everything to keep it safe, and now it was up to her to finish what her grandmother had started. Without thinking, Emma grabbed the journal, the key, and her phone and rushed out of the house. The night was dark, and the wind howled through the trees, but she didn't care. She had to keep the key hidden no matter what. As she disappeared into the forest, the lights in her house flickered, and a shadowy figure stepped out from the darkness, watching her retreating form with cold, calculating eyes. The clock in the living room struck midnight, but the ticking had never resumed.